Well, joining me now to look at a pretty momentous week in federal politics are two veteran members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Tonda MacCharles is a national political reporter for the Toronto Star, and Bob Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Both of you, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Martin. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's start with something. I mean, I mentioned veteran reporters because this is an issue that we've been covering for so long and we've been watching for so many years. What do you make of what you saw today at the Vatican and Pope Francis? Tonda.
Look, I think you don't have to be an Indigenous person or a Catholic, for that matter, to get the significance of the moment today. And hopefully the Pope will come to Canada and give many of the Indigenous communities what they need to hear here on the soil in North America. But I think that the import of this can't be underestimated. It was a call for action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I really wondered what Prime Minister Trudeau thought of it all, how he heard about it today, because honestly, he is a Catholic and he has been calling for this and urging Catholics to pressure the church for just this moment today. So I think all around it was pretty historic. And again, it's just one step along that journey. So, but nevertheless, a pretty big day.
I just want to throw something in because you mentioned the Prime Minister. I read his press release, and his press release said, "I acknowledge the Pope's apology." It wasn't, "I thank him for it." It was a very parsed, very interesting reaction. Bob, what do you make of what we saw today?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be thanking him for making an apology. The church has dragged its feet for decades in acknowledging the terrible things of sexual abuse that it committed against children. And and it will be an important moment for sure when the Pope comes to Canada and goes up into these Indigenous communities and hears them and then apologizes them in person. I think that'll be, to me, much more significant. But let's remember, there are pedophile priests, including a man in France in a church sanctuary, who has been accused of abusing children. And these people are now adults. They've lived with the horrors of being abused by this priest. If the Catholic Church was true to its word about apology, it would have that priest sent back to Canada to face charges of the kind of abuse that he did to these Indigenous Inuit children. So, fine with apologies, but boy, oh boy, they've got a lot to atone for.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention.
And further to Bob's point, look, there are still questions around the return of documents, turning documents over to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and giving communities the ability to track down perpetrators and to identify lost children in unmarked graves, and also to chase down justice today. Bob is absolutely right. The church is a long ways from having met its obligations to people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just going to interject that what we saw this week, too, ironically, was that the RCMP issued a Canada-wide arrest warrant for this priest in question to face charges, of allegedly abusing children in Nunavut. Obviously, he's still in France, so the request from the Inuit, especially this week, was for the Pope to actually get involved directly. Okay, I want to look at the week in general because this was something that was a big development. This was a week full of big developments. I know, Tonda, you wrote about one of those developments, and many people said that we would never see a national affordable daycare program, and we saw the last bits of that program come into effect this week with the announcement by Ontario. We now have a national program. We also saw midweek the follow-up with the government's first ever legislation spelling out its commitments to greenhouse gas emission reductions. What do you make of the week, Tonda?
Well, just on the first piece, I'm one of those people who never thought I'd ever see a national child care plan. I mean, I've been covering it for decades, and since the Harper government sort of efforts to try and build one, and then actually the Paul Martin government's efforts, and then the Harper government killed it and tried to put in some other kind of system. Look, I really think that we can't, though, say it's in place yet. A lot depends on the implementation. But absolutely, it's a huge hole to fill to have gotten Ontario on board with this framework. But the combination of that and the climate change plan, rolling out an actual plan insofar as it is a plan to meet the targets by 2030, there are still big gaps in there.
Yeah.
I think what it said to me was that this is a government that, notwithstanding the war in Ukraine, notwithstanding huge global issues, notwithstanding COVID and the pandemic that's ongoing, is trying to get back to its governing agenda. To what extent we'll see more of that in the budget coming up this week. I mean, I think the government deems itself to have been elected on a certain mandate that it wants to follow through on. And ever since it was elected first in 2015, it gets sidetracked by events, whether it was NAFTA, whether it was Donald Trump, whether it was the pandemic, and now the global recession. Look, I think that's the effort that they're focused on now, trying to get back to doing some of the things in their platform.
And you mentioned it. Well, Bob, what do you make of the week? Because I want to get to the budget and what you're watching for. What do you make of the week and the kind of week it was?
Well, look, these are all set pieces for next week's budget. There's a lot of spending here going on, an awful lot of spending. We know it's billions of dollars for the child care, $9 billion at least for the climate change initiatives, and there's billions and billions of more in election spending that will be announced in the budget, as well as they've got to show the money that they're going to be spending on dental care and farmer care as part of the NDP deal. And what we're going to, at least what I'm going to be watching for, is whether they're, with all of this spending, which, by the way, the government is lucky because inflation, commodity prices have been high and corporate balance sheets are strong, that they have money to be able to spend. But the business community is really, really concerned that there's not going to be any growth strategy, that their growth strategy just spend more money on an already overheated economy. And the danger here is inflation. And we're adding more fuel to inflation, and this is going to be it's going to end up with the Bank of Canada having to significantly increase interest rates to drive down inflation. And so to me, we have to watch next week is there a growth agenda to create wealth in this country and help productivity and competitiveness, and also to be able to watch how much they spend so it doesn't fuel inflation. If they don't do any of that, we could be into a lot of trouble in the next few years.
Okay, Tonda, you alluded it. You opened the door to the federal budget. Next Thursday, Chrystia Freeland tables the budget. We know that it's not going to be that cliffhanger about will they be defeated on this budget, a confidence vote, because the NDP, they've got to deal with the NDP who are going to support the next 4 budgets. What are you looking for particularly in the budget? Given that you won't have that element of drama, but what are you watching for?
Well, notwithstanding the lack of drama as to whether the government lives or dies on the budget vote, I think that, first of all, Bob's pointed out a couple of big pieces. Who's going to pay for it all? How is it all going to be paid for? How is Canada going to reduce its deficit? What is the track to reduce the deficit and the debt to GDP ratio, which is what the government initially set out as its first sort of measure of success. But I'm also looking for, given the moment we're in and given the very heated rhetoric we've heard around the Ukraine war, the aggression of Russia in Ukraine, and what that means for democracies everywhere, according to the government, I'm going to be also very much keen to see how the government addresses that moment, what kind of defense spending they're prepared to put on the table to match their rhetoric with action.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a very interesting one because we've had some mixed signals. We had about 2 weeks ago Defense Minister Anita Anand saying that she was going to submit different scenarios to the Finance Minister, Minister Freeland, one of which would be for a massive increase in spending, and then she seems to have not mentioned that again. Bob, your sense of what are you watching for in terms of defense spending?
Well,
if you had to,
I agree with Tonda that we're going to have I think we'll see in the budget obviously is issues around the green economy. Affordability issues. They've already said that a core component of the budget will be measures to help people build more houses and more low-cost housing. But to Tonda's point, we're going to all watch with clear eyes to see whether this budget on defense is more smoke and mirrors, or whether they're really serious about significantly increasing defense spending, including $4 billion to beef up NORAD, or whether all this money is projected later down the road and can be easily not fulfilled, like they've done so often with defense budgets. So it'll be an important moment to see whether Canada actually stands up with other NATO allies and puts money where its mouth is.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you, and we will watch with great interest, and we will no doubt speak post-budget. Thanks, both of you.
Thanks,
you.
Martin.